You're in Cambridge, Massachusetts. How did you hear about me? Did you find me on Twitter or?
Oh, yeah. Recently and stuff and everything, I saw like a lot of like sex workers were absolutely livid with you about like
Yes. Oh
the
my gosh.
comments that you had made, I guess, about sex work being like akin to like paying somebody to rape. Like I think that was the
Right, bribing someone to write, which was a premise that I had, kind of an extreme premise that I had put up there as a way to start a conversation and a debate. And I should have, honestly, I should have been more careful and more sensitive about that, because it's a sensitive issue, and frankly, personally, I think that there are a lot of women that are in prostitution specifically, or even along the way, but maybe are in that work in part because they've been abused. And as someone who's struggled and suffered from, I've never been raped, but I'm a survivor of 8 sexual assaults. And so, for me, there are times where you just kind of separate yourself from that, almost like dissociation, in order to just not think about it and not really feel it. And there are times that I should be able to kind of recognize that that was an important time for me to be more sensitive. And so I jumped in on that and should have been more careful in order to be able to have an open dialogue. But it in general, I think it was a good discussion. I like being able to have those kinds of discussions in order to kind of work through and think through big issues. And as much as possible, I like having those discussions openly and publicly, so that I think so that everybody can be involved in them, because I think our society kind of tends to shy away from those kinds of discussions, and understandably so, but I think they're important to have, especially if we're talking about legislation that needs to be adjusted or passed or changed. I think it's important that we have those discussions in order to make sure that we are addressing the real issues, not only for sex workers that are concerned, but also because it brings in the possibility of ramifications that are really important. And as difficult as the topic is and as the subject is, I think it's important to be able to have it, to have that discussion, and to not kind of set the example that, hey, America, we need to really talk about this kind of stuff. We need to not be afraid of it. We need to be more sensitive about it. And that was my bad. And I apologize for not being more carefully articulate in explaining that was an extreme premise intentionally, so that we could start at a place that was kind of way on one side and work our way back a little more carefully. So I'm glad you saw it. I hope that it wasn't, I hope that it didn't leave a whole bunch of negativity in your heart and mind about the situation, or about me in general, because that's kind of rough.
No, not at all. Like I think like I kind of differ, like as far as like I don't know, like it's, as far as like where you stand. I think like you are open to the conversation of like decriminalizing sex work. I'm not open to that possibility at all. I think like actually that prostitution should be criminalized more. I think like, a lot of times and stuff, everything, like they kind of make this excuse and stuff, everything, that it seems to me like, because I interview a lot of adult film stars, that a lot of people are in that business and stuff willingly. And so a lot of like state's attorneys and prosecutors, they're going after the Johns. And I don't think that seems fair, and that they're want to charge like men specifically for like women who like, go on these sites. I just wrote a site on the Packy about arrows.com and stuff, everything. So like there's this site, like, obviously the feds, they've taken down like Backpage and these other
Right.
sex sites, but like, this site is still up and like, allowing to be able to operate. So like, I think like there's a lot of like hypocrisy, like, with,
Yeah, I could see that.
but like in Seattle and stuff, everything, like what's been going on, I've seen like, Seattle looters, agitators, anarchists, protesters, they're refusing to leave the chop zone. Do you think this demonstrates a lack of respect for the government overall?
Gosh, yes and no. I think there might be an underlying complication to it. One of my favorite radio talk show hosts, uses the phrase, if you see a double standard, it means there's a hidden agenda. And I think that we've seen a lot of that in the Seattle area lately, in Washington State in general. And so there are so many different people that are involved in the protests, in that it can be really difficult to lump it all in. There are people that are there that legitimately are concerned, genuinely are concerned about police brutality and about injustices that have happened. And I'd say a lack of oversight, a lack of accountability, and a lack of justice for those injustices. They haven't seen justice done, and I think that's a legitimate problem. So, and I would say that that's not even necessarily rebellion against government, but kind of a demand for a higher standard from government. And I find that a legitimate reason to be out there. And you know, it's easy when we have a concern like that, particularly when it's about an injustice, like the murder of people by authority figures, by police, or if it was, you know, a prosecuting attorney that was corrupt, something along those lines. That's emotional, because there's very little, it feels like there's very little recourse. You can, you know, in a normal system, or I guess in a benevolent or good system, you'd be able to go to an attorney, to go to, or even just if something happened, there would be oversight so that it could be addressed right away. You wouldn't even have to find an attorney, because it would be, you know, clear, hey, this was an injustice. And so you have so many different people, because I think there are people there, they'll you know, as well in CHOP or in the surrounding areas and suburbs that are exploiting the opportunity in order to turn it into, in order to push their agenda. And that's where I see the double standards happening. And unfortunately, I see a lot of the double standards, I guess they're more apparent or blatant in the leadership. You know, our governor will really condemn people doing rallies at the Capitol against the lockdown. And he'll condemn it, and he'll talk about, I don't remember if he did for this specifically, but he'll shame that kind of activity as, hey, you're going to kill grandma, or something along those lines, kind of with hyperbole, as a way to kind of shut it down, I think. And you didn't see him do that with the protests that were happening in response to the murder of George Floyd. And even after it became clear that there were agitators that were infiltrating those protests for their own agenda, that they were not, I mean, there were even protesters that were trying to push back. We've seen video across the country, I don't know about the Seattle area specifically, but pushing back, saying, look, don't break windows, don't be violent, you know, let's keep things calm. And so I think there are factions within the protests that are rebelling against government. Their goal is to really say, hey, you know, we just don't want any of this. We don't want any authority over us. It's very anarchist in ideology. And I think there's an underlying, from the leadership, I think there's an underlying tone of Marxism to it that concerns me, which is not a rebellion against government in general, but against our current governmental system. and how it works. And so that concerns me. And so I see that there. And so your question is a really good one. And I wish I had a more succinct answer for it, unfortunately, because there's just so many people that are involved now. And I almost wonder if that's done intentionally in order to legitimize the violence or the hijacking. It's sort of like, if we take on a movement that is legitimate and has a good moral standing, and certainly protesting the violence and the murder of George Floyd was legitimate. And I mean, had you left it at that, the whole country would have been right behind that. We all would have been together on that. And it was only really when it started turning into, or appeared to start turning into, an excuse for these agitators to come in and riot and loot, that people were like, whoa, I don't want to, I can't be a part of that. And so, it's a really good question. And it just is, I don't think there's a simple answer to it, because there's a lot of people wrapped up in it. And I wonder if that's intentional, because it basically allows the anti-government faction to kind of fly under the radar for a time, and kind of exploit something in order to be able to continue or get away with what they're doing, which is even more frustrating and discouraging, in my opinion. So.
For sure. Coronavirus cases, they're on the rise in Washington. Are you happy with the way that Governor Inslee has been handling the crisis?
So it's really interesting. I've been actually tracking the data since February 26th, I think, is when they started giving us the information. Or I have a good friend that started compiling all of the data into a spreadsheet for me. And then after about a month, she kind of gave up, and I took over and kept it going. And she and I had been looking at it together, and I've kept it going, and just to see where we are, and you can pull kind of graphs from it, and I can send that to you if it's helpful. What we're actually seeing is that the raw number of cases is increasing, but the percentage of cases in relation to the number of tests that we're doing is actually staying the same pretty much, right around 5 to 6% of tests that we run for COVID in Washington State are positive. And that hasn't, that's been, I think that average is the same from the first half to the second half. And so we're seeing more cases, we're seeing an increase in cases, but it appears that it's probably due to the fact that we are increasing the number of tests that we're doing. I believe if you compare the first, month or two, I think I did February 26th to April 30th. If you compare that to May 1st through like June 15th or something like that, we were, the first half of COVID so far, we were doing about 2,000 tests a day. And in the second half, the average is more like 6,000 tests per day. Actually, the first half, I think, was more like 2,500 per day. And now it's more like 6,000 tests per day. And the number of cases is actually about the same. I believe it was like 213 per day for the first half, and about 230 for the second half that I ran the data for. So we're looking at, an increase of about 15 per day that in positive cases, when we're actually doing 2 to 3 times as many tests. And so technically, if we're doing the same number of tests, we would see, statistically, we would see fewer cases. And so it's, I think that as far as how the governor is handling things, I'm disappointed that he's not using the data. I honestly, like, I think he's disingenuous in how he presents it. Gives a lot of information saying, hey, we've got all these increase in cases, but he doesn't talk about the he doesn't talk about the number of tests that we're running and how that's changed, and he doesn't look at all of that information. And so I think that's deceitful, and disappointing because of that. I think from the start, uh, what I would have liked to see is to have him really guard over our nursing home communities, especially in the beginning. I believe we had a significant number of outbreaks. I think every outbreak, at least for the first month, where it was in a nursing home facility. And I was very concerned that there was some kind of contaminant that was being used, some kind of medical equipment or something that was being used in nursing homes that we didn't know about, that had been contaminated. I know there were hospital gowns that, I think 9 million hospital gowns, that had been manufactured in China that were recalled because of contamination with COVID. And I was worried about that. The way that the outbreaks happened, that was what concerned me. And I would have liked to have seen some better protection over that community. And I think had we done that, things might have been different. It's easy in hindsight. I think in the moment it can be difficult to make, more difficult to make a decision like that when it's brand new and we don't know we don't know a whole lot about it. I think even at that time, when in February, when Washington State had their first cases, we knew that it really impacted our older community hard. And so that seemed like it should have been a pretty ready decision to make, a pretty easy decision to make, to kind of say, hey, no one in and out of nursing homes unless you have specific protocol that you're following. And I would have liked to seen that change, and was surprised that wasn't implemented right away. I think that now that we are quite far beyond that and looking at what COVID is like in the general population, we know that the fatality rate is less than 1%, and that if you're under 60 years old, it's extremely low. And so I think that Washington State residents should be concerned that there's a hidden agenda here. The double standards are pretty glaring in a lot of cases, and so I'd like to see things handled differently as far as being able to open up businesses, and that's been the case, all along. We had a lot of businesses that were closed, but the Washington State government employees, were still allowed to work. And so I think the first place we saw that change was in construction work. So the construction workers, private construction workers, said, hey, this isn't right. Your government construction workers are still working. We can follow the same protocol. We need to work. And so that was the first place that we kind of saw a double standard, that we saw it be able to change. So yeah, there are things I'd like him to be handling quite a bit differently, but it is a difficult situation. And so and it's easy to be the armchair quarterback and sit back and say, hey, you should be doing this. So
Right. Are you running on a no mask platform? Is that correct? Are you running? Yeah.
Well, as far as masks are concerned, I would say that I'm running on a platform of no mandatory masks.
Right.
I think had I been in that situation, I'm certainly not running for governor. But had I been in that situation with that kind of authority, I think I would have, even from the start, just said, look, this is what we recommend. I think people have different situations. There are a lot of people in Washington State, in my area in particular, in my community, that we had these symptoms back in November or December, and we have young families, and or maybe we're in a church where we do have a lot of retirees and seniors, and we want to be more careful. I think that the more we try to centralize the requirements and the mandates for it, the more we will struggle with finding the right balance. Whereas if you make sure that you give the recommendations that are, that people might not know, if you have that science to work with and the research to work with, and um, you can give the most educated information and recommendations, then I think that you have that responsibility to say, look, this is what we recommend. This is what we've seen is the best. But I certainly would not, I would not mandate it, especially across the state. I'd leave that up at least to each county, to make their own decision on that. Just particularly in Washington, where it's very, very different from county to county.
Definitely. How do you, I've seen on your Twitter, and you've voiced some support for the group, the Proud Boys.
Yeah.
The FBI, like, you know what I mean, has said that they have ties to white nationalism and it's considered a far right hate group. But like your Twitter, you kind of like, have like, you show a different story, a different side to them.
I do, yeah. It's hard. That kind of group, all groups are made up of different people, individuals, and so you can have a group of people that where just one person in that can make the group reflect poorly on the group. And it would not surprise me if there are people in the group that I don't know that are that hold bigoted perspectives, or viewpoints. That wouldn't surprise me. I think that's true in just about every large group that you have. My personal experience with the Proud Boys has been very encouraging. I've stood shoulder to shoulder with Black and Hispanic members of the Proud Boys at events where we defended Jewish people from discrimination and hatred. And that was my first experience with members of the Proud Boys personally, because I'd heard about them through the media, and so I was floored. They were just they were dedicated to protecting our group and the people that we were with from Antifa in particular. I think that's part of what they show up for, is to make sure that they are there to oppose Antifa. And I can't speak for them. But I know that either the current leader or the leader previous to now is 50% Asian. And the two people, I want to say the two Proud Boys that I know the best, that I've interacted with the most, one is Black or Muslim. And the other is Hispanic, for both of those men. And we stood there next to a Jewish man who was gay and proud, and made sure that he had a voice. And it was an encouraging experience to me to be able to stand with such a diverse group at a time when our country seems to be so incredibly divided. To be able to stand and just say, look, it's okay for you to believe what you believe, but it's not okay to shut down the viewpoints of others, or to discriminate against people. And so that's been my experience. And I know there are other, I believe there's a chapter leader in I can't remember what state he's in, but he's Cuban American, and he spoke with a reporter on CNN about what Proud Boys is and what Western chauvinism means. A lot of people see that on their webpage, and it uses the word chauvinism, and we always hear the word chauvinism as male chauvinism. So it's then assumed that they're sexist, especially since it's an all men's group. And that's not actually how the word is used, and so it has been, I think, a source of confusion. But the Western chauvinism is just a favoritism or a pride in Western ideology that liberty and justice are valued, and that individuals are deserving, each as human beings intrinsically should be respected and are deserving of liberty and justice, each as individuals. That kind of socio political philosophy and ideology is the best one for the human race. And so yeah, and my experience with them has been very, very diverse, and maybe that's not the way it is in other areas, but I tend to defend them when people attack them, specifically because I have that personal experience of, hey, this isn't what they are. These men are not, the men that I know that in this group are not racist. And the group, they're in that group in some respects, specifically because it isn't racist, because they can be there and they can enjoy the camaraderie with other men in a diverse group of men.
Fair enough. What's your reaction to the president recently retweeting a racist video showing a supporter yelling white power?
So I can't really speak to that. I didn't see the video, and I believe he took it down, and so I can't even. I tried to go back and find it, and I honestly I couldn't tell. There were a couple other people that posted a video that I thought maybe could have been the same one, but it didn't say specifically. So I don't think I've seen it. And well, maybe I don't. Did you see it? Because maybe you can.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's clear.
Okay, is it a whole bunch of people going around in like golf carts or something with people yelling at them?
Yeah, it's
okay.
like the golf cart. Yeah.
And that's what I thought. The person that, so I have a friend who posted that, and he didn't say that it was what the president had tweeted, but it was, he posted it, I think, kind of as a response. And so I assumed that maybe that was it, but I didn't actually hear anybody say anything. I didn't hear anybody say race, or what was it, white power? I didn't hear anybody say that in that video. And so I don't know if maybe he had a different clip of it, or if I just didn't hear it. I only watched it twice, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, in the video I saw on the news, clearly says white power. I think it can be heard. I find it hard to believe from previous like press conferences that I've watched with the president and stuff, everything, that he wouldn't hear that in the video unless he had his sound turned up and he's just blindly retweeting videos. And, I think that is pretty irresponsible. I'm not bothered, by necessarily the fact that the president is being alleged to be racist. I think more so it shows like very bad decision making that he would retweet this, particularly for the people that do support him and what's going on currently in the country. It just shows like a lot of bad decision making on his part currently.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I think that I know I had a very good friend of mine who's a solid researcher, and she had shared with me something that somebody else had tweeted, because she's not even on Twitter, but she shared a video with me, and a lot of times I'll just kind of trust her judgment on it. And I watched the video, and there was a gentleman in it that I believe yelled the N-word, and I was not sure about it. And so I actually, I texted her back, and I was like, hey, did he just say that? And she's like, oh gosh, yes. And so, I would hope that at the very least the president has somebody who's, kind of screening the information that's brought to him, um, in order to make sure that there is a check and balance on that. Um, and that if he's doing that, if he's doing the retweeting and the tweeting on his own, um, I would hope that he would watch them fully to make sure that he's retweeting or not retweeting things that are divisive and hurtful, especially right now. I apologize that I haven't watched the video, so I can't speak to it directly, but in general, I've said, I think for the last 4 years, look, if you could just have, hire somebody to take over Twitter for you, even if it's 7 figures, it's worth it. Just do it. Like, it would be fantastic there's just so much division from the things that he says and on Twitter specifically. And when you only have, is it 280 characters now? At least you have that. It's a little better than before, but if that's all you have, it's really, you need somebody who has a gift in order to make sure that what gets out there is good and helpful, and yeah, totally worth a 7-figure salary, in my opinion, to have that a better check and balance there. Now, I don't disagree with that at all, and I will try to find that video so that I can actually watch it, so I can actually kind of see what the situation was in that, because I was trying to find it before and I didn't. So at least now I know. Thank you. That'll help me make sure that I know what I'm looking for, so that I can listen carefully then. And was it in the beginning or at the end, or?
It's right at the beginning. It's a pretty
Okay.
short video.
I probably just like watched it and missed it because I wasn't paying attention and thought it was going to be close to the end or something like that. So I'll watch that again.
Definitely. In your race in the 45th district, what's next for you?
What's that?
What's next for you? With your race and stuff, everything, is it being affected by campaigning, obviously, by COVID-19 and?
So honestly, at this point, it's kind of hard to tell. We have our primary coming up. I don't have any other Republicans that are running, and so the race is a little different. I don't have to do a lot of campaigning specifically at the very beginning, and especially with mail-in ballots, everything's a little bit different out here. And with COVID, people don't necessarily want you coming knocking on their doors, and we can't have a lot of big town hall meetings. I think I would honestly prefer to do town halls rather than the more formal forums. I appreciate being able to have a conversation with people. I think it's a good way to make sure that you're, particularly for constituents, that your question is heard, that it's understood properly, and that there's no way for me to weasel my way around not answering a hard question or an important question just because I don't like what my answer is going to be, or don't like the question that was asked. And it makes sure that I know where people's hearts are, so that I can really address that. And in our district, up until maybe 2016, 2017, I think we were more 50-50. Right now we're 2-1 blue. According to the 2018, when I ran in 2018, we're 2-1 blue. And so, I'm trying to keep my campaign really small. Mostly I want to make sure that people have an option, that they know that I'm paying attention, and that the incumbent knows that people are paying attention, and then we can really kind of challenge that. I think if nobody is there to challenge it, if there aren't any opponents, you tend to risk. And my opponent is very kind and gracious, and so it's not necessarily to him directly, but I think as a general rule, you tend to end up with politicians and bureaucrats that become complacent, and they kind of take their position for granted, and maybe there's a risk of listening to constituents less on the things that particularly that you disagree with. Maybe even sort of the same kind of ideas, having an echo chamber. Um, and so, I kind of want to keep things small, especially during COVID. I know it's been really tough on members of my family and my community. Um, and so I have a hard time saying, "Hey, come support," you know, a politician um, in the middle of all this when you're struggling to pay your bills, or you're struggling to support, your parents or your grandparents or your kids if they're laid off. And as much as I think it's important right now to fight for policy to be as good as it can be, and to fight for good changes to be made where we see that there are weaknesses, and where we see that, particularly where we see constituents are not being prioritized, and maybe even are being exploited. I think that policy is important. And of course, it's the representatives and the senators in our state that do that policy making and that do the legislating. And so it isn't, the politics is important in that sense. But I'm not a big fan of money in politics anyway, and so it's been hard um, to kind of push past that, to be able to feel comfortable asking for people to support it. And so mostly, I do as much as I can on social media because it's nice, it's cheap, and I can reach a lot more people. Of course, then I reach people in Massachusetts and stuff, and so it's sort of like it
You're
gets a little bit different.
very important. I really like your stance against like, cronyism and like, you're really
Yeah.
for the people. And I think like, it's very important that, there's people in government who actually care about the people. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you. So thank you so much for taking the time.
I appreciate that. Again.